Today on my show, I'm happy to have Mike Fillmore, Senior Marketing Manager at Dentrix. We'll be talking about how Dentrix is actually using practice problems to develop new features and functionality to their software. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
You know, Mike, it's kind of interesting. You're a quote senior marketing manager, but you and I have talked a lot. And what I'm excited about and why we have such long discussions sometimes is because you do have a little bit of a technical bent. Can you tell my viewers a little bit about your background? Because it's a little bit unique in that you do marketing, but you also have a little bit of technical background.
Yeah, so like you, Mike, wasn't always in marketing. I did a little marketing and sales, but for about first 10 or 12 years of my career, we were doing technical sales. So I was a pre-sales technical specialist. I was the guy that was supposed to make sure that the sales guy was telling the truth, build the solutions, and make sure that they would operate in the customer's business environment. So had a little technical training. I wouldn't call myself a developer or a technical support or anything, but I have held some of those roles.
Right. I guess the old cliche is just a little bit too much knowledge to be dangerous, right?
Yeah, just enough to be dangerous. Yep.
So what's really interesting, what I like to focus on is, you know, everybody thinks these days with all the talk about DSOs and groups and consolidation, I think there's a thought that, you know, the groups, the DSOs, because they have money, because they're larger, can afford features and functionality, what I call next generation features and functionality. But it's really interesting because at Dentrix, you know, focusing on small groups, you've actually developed features and functionality that I think we would see in groups and DSOs as well, which is kind of exciting. And what's unusual about your approach a little bit is that obviously Dentrix, you have a few customers, right? And
Right.
it sounds like you've actually taken surveys and actually developed some of your new features kind of based on problems that you saw that your present customers have. Can you talk a little bit about that approach?
Sure. Yeah. So we have something called the customer voice. Customers can vote on what they would like to see go into the product next. We watch what customers talk about. We watch what they ask us about, and we watch the industry to see what's popping up. Teledentistry is probably a good example, right? It's come up as a need in this time of the pandemic. But Dentrix tries to make it a point. I don't know if it's extremely unique, but it's definitely necessary. But we try to make sure that we use customer input and industry problems to guide what we decide to do with the product.
Well, to me, that's important because as a consultant helping practices and groups and DSOs get software, when I go into an organization, the first thing I say is, hey, let's figure out what your problems are and your pain points, and let's find software to meet that. So it's kind of refreshing to see that as a vendor producing software, you actually look at that way as well. So I'd like to kind of start out with what I think both you and I see is a really big pain point these days. You know, as we get into more sophisticated software, we see all kinds of applications having to come together: patient education, imaging, social media, different kinds of financial applications, analytics. And, you know, for my customers at least, there's always a concern that, hey, you know what, my head's spinning. There's just too many applications. I have to deal with too many vendors. But yet, I think at Henry Schein One, what I've been learning from you folks is that you're kind of bringing the idea of multiple vendors together in a platform. Can you talk a little bit about how you're doing that and what you're doing by bringing different applications together in your platform?
Yeah, that word is probably what we use first to discuss that. We don't want to be another vendor or practice management software. We want to be your practice management partner and platform. So a platform is something you used to build on top of, something you used to build together. And that's really what we want to be able to provide for customers, is the ability to not just have a lot of solutions that integrate together. That's one thing I think is really important, is having something that can integrate well and does integrate well with several different solutions that you need to support a lot of different pieces of your practice, but also the ability for you as the dentist to go ahead and make your own choice, decide what tech stack you want to put in your office, and be able to still have it integrate with your practice management system like Dentrix without having a lot of problems, without guessing whether or not this vendor has some special or exclusive relationship with that vendor. We really try to be open about what partners we allow to tie into our system.
So I have a question. I know that you work with a lot of partners. How many, I think you said, how many partners do you have right now, kind of approximately in the whole, in Henry Schein world?
Yeah, entities and organizations that use our standard APIs for Dentrix, I think we had around 250.
Okay, so my question is then, okay, I have a dental practice, right? And there's all these vendors out there that work on the Shine platform. How do I know what's important? Do you come in, I mean, when you work with a practice, do you kind of help them a little bit figure out which applications or which functionality with your partners, with Dentrix, they should bring together? Because it could be mind-boggling, I would think, all the options they would have.
Yeah, so Dentrix tries not to tell people how to practice, right? We know that each dentist kind of has their own deal. They'll find their own workflows, find their own groove. But we do know that technology can be a little bit overwhelming because of all the considerations from outside the practice and inside your practice that create some of those needs, some of those problems that technology can solve or make worse, right? So Dentrix tries to have our core platform, things we're really good at and will always be good at, around the billing and scheduling and clinical side of things, right?
Mhm.
But when you step outside of that, yeah, we have solutions that'll tie into that. But if you're talking about, what direction they want to go, what kind of helping them learn what they should do, is Dentrix has a philosophy about not just wanting you to be proficient at using the software. We actually want you to be better at your job. So we help with a lot of business training along those lines as well. And we feel like when you do that business training, you have a better idea of the technologies that you might want to put in place to help you do better, to help you get better at your job.
Okay,
So that's,
and to me that's really important, obviously, because there's two components. There's the actual software, but there's really the people part of it, right? And so that part of what you're calling business training, helping people to incorporate features and functionality in their practice, is really important. I'd like to kind of go into another pain point, and it's the whole financial health area. And you and I have talked when I've looked a little, did a deep dive on Dentrix. You have some reporting and analytics that I think will help even a small practice kind of get hold of the financial aspects of their practice. Can you talk a little bit about those tools?
sure. There's a lot of reports and a lot of reporting going on right now. It's become one of those key pillars of practice management systems, right? And we have a few things to help you track the health of your practice. Something called the Practice Advisor Report that we produce. It was one of the first in the industry, and pretty robust, customized reporting tool that allows you to set goals for your practice, set your KPIs, your key performance indicators, where you think they should be. And that might take a little training in itself, right? To understand, well, what goals should my practice have? And we actually have a profitability coaching team that helps you set those goals. But it's called the Practice Advisor. We also have, daily and weekly and monthly reports you should be pulling. And we'll talk about automated task reporting here in just a little bit. But we have something called the Daily Huddle that helps you focus on your daily goals and helps you daily move towards those larger KPIs that you've set. And then when you get into something like the Practice Advisor Report, you can think about it kind of like um, having a 3-course meal. You got to get in there and take care of it a piece at a time, so that we're not so that you don't get something you don't want at the end. But it's very customizable. It's a robust reporting tool that allows you to track the health and profitability of your practice, especially from a
Okay.
financial production.
Is it okay, Mike, if I use that 3-course meal analogy in future podcasts? I kind of like that to kind of separate steps. So I
Well, I
appreciate
use
that.
that because a lot of reporting tools are snacks. They show you this little tiny piece of data for your practice and this little tiny piece of data for your practice, instead of helping all of that data come together to help really to show you where the healthier practice is at.
No, that's very true. I'd like to move into something very near and dear to my heart. As you know, one of the main reasons I got into dental technology and software technology a few years ago from the medical world was because I wanted to really get more involved with where clinical software is growing, EHRs, patient care software. And so I know one of the problems, right? Because there's so much going on these days with that aspect, clinical software, EHRs, patient care technology. I think it's kind of mind-boggling. And just keeping up with patient care technology is tough for practice looking at software. One of the things that you and I have talked about is really almost customizing this experience for patient care. And you talk about things like patient preferences. Can you talk about what
Yeah.
that means in terms of how you guys look at patient care, the ability to customize the patient experience in the clinic?
Sure. And usually what we start out by saying, right, is that your patient care is a small portion of your patient experience. Your patient experience starts well before they get to the practice and ends after they leave the practice, right? It almost never ends. It's cyclical in nature. So when you talk about patient preferences and you talk about patient engagement, you're not just talking about how to engage them when they're in the office or when they're in the chair. And that's really, I think, important when we talk about, again, some of those outside forces that a practice feels like they don't have any control over. Patient consumerism and patient preferences is one of those. We feel like you have to think ahead and understand how your patients prefer to be communicated with, how they prefer to be reminded, how they prefer to be thought of, how they prefer to sit in their chair, what kind of things they prefer to get from a loyalty perspective. There's a lot of different preferences. If they like to get, and this is probably a really common one, do they like to get phone calls or texts? Or do they like to, receive a postcard on their birthday? Or, these are patient preferences, but a patient brings a whole set of preferences with them for every piece of the patient journey, not just when they're there. For example, does a patient prefer to use, what kind of browser do they prefer to use when they search for a dentist? If you want to get found, make sure you're on those browsers. It's those kinds of things, that we want to make sure of when we take into account what a patient's experience is going to be, and what we have to take into account what those preferences are, so that you can provide a top of the line experience for that customer even before they get to your office.
And so as we focus on the patient care aspect of that and patient care per se, one of the things that you and I have talked about that you're doing with Dentrix is the whole idea of what I'm going to call image integration. Okay, making it easier to do the imaging aspects within Dentrix. Can you talk a little bit about what you folks are doing to help a practice with the image integration aspects?
Sure. So this is something that we've been excited about for a little while, and it's really what I call the democratization of imaging. But more than that, right? We're bringing together clinical and financial workflows. So similarly, again, it's called Dentrix Smart Image. There's more on the way. I'm sure we can talk about later, right? But the real innovative piece of this starts here. And Dentrix Smart Image, when we're really talking about that, is just that. I know it's cliche to use smart in all of your wording, right? But we're taking any kind of imaging that comes in from a different piece of imaging software, CBCTs, panos, 2D and 3D imaging, right? Your intraoral scanning images, and bringing them together into one place to help with diagnosis, right? So you have them in your chart, you have them in the patient notes, so you can see where they're at all at once, and co-diagnose with the patient if that's what you do. However you choose to use them, you have them all there. So we take away, first of all, we take away clicks and time, right? Which is nice, but also you take away when we talk about automated workflows and integrated workflows, we take away the chance, some of the chances for error in those workflows. So it's not just having them all together in one place. That's awesome. That's great. That'll help provide better care. But the next step is, well, let's remember to bill for that. Well, how are we going to remember to bill for that? It needs to go into the ledger. Somebody has to remember to do that. Well, the software should actually do that for you. And what about after that? I mean, in order to get paid, especially if the customer has insurance, you got to make sure not just that it makes its way into the ledger, but that it also goes and gets attached. The correct images get attached to the correct claim, and that claim makes its way to the insurance
And
company.
actually, Mike,
Yeah.
bringing up the workflows, I think you read in my mind a little bit, because obviously a big pain point, a big problem, and a big concern of a small practice, especially these days with so much going on, so much to think about, is how can they streamline their operations? How can they make it more efficient? And the whole idea of workflows obviously is a big part of that. And as you just started talking about the idea about bringing the concept of automation of workflows or managing tasks within the practice within your software, I think is pretty nice, and actually in a small practice, pretty unique with some of the dental software I've seen. So can you talk a little bit more about the concept of automating workflows and doing task management within Dentrix?
Sure. So I think the important part of that is to realize that your digital workflows, paperless practices, has got another boom here with the pandemic, I think, to help reduce some of the touch points. But having unified or streamlined digital workflows are important. If all you've done is take your physical processes and put them into digital form, having 100 disparate digital tasks to perform that aren't connected in any way isn't any better than having 100 physical ones, and it's probably more complicated. You've made more work for yourself. So the important part is to have automated, integrated, streamlined workflows, which means that if it's mundane and repeatable, your software should be doing it, not you. To take away some of that time and give it back to you so that you can actually do more interesting and productive and creative things with it as a dentist and as a staff. So yeah, when we talk about task management, right, a workflow is really, when we think about it, right, the digital clinical workflow especially has been an abused term in the industry. It means everything and it means nothing at the same time. It's anywhere that your patient or your patient's data touches your practice and what you have to do with that data. So for me, every workflow is made up of a bunch of discrete tasks that you have to complete in order to get something done. That's a workflow. You got to submit a claim. You have to check for insurance eligibility. You got to check for eligibility. You got to do the procedure and provide care. You got to, all these things can be thought of as different workflows made up of many discrete tasks. Dentrix is
So
trying
I have a question for you, Mike,
to
regarding workflows. So you were just talking about how step one, step two, how you need to, and every practice is different, right? They're going to define their own workflows, the way their operations goes. Within the software, can you require workflows to have certain steps? In other words, if there's a 10-step or a 20-step process, you have to go from A to B to C, especially if, let's say, there's a new person with the practice that doesn't really understand all the workflow yet. Can the software help them get from A to Z in workflow?
Yeah. Let me give you a smart image example, right? So if you want to automatically post a code, you can put that code in there and it'll automatically post it. If you don't want it to do that, right? You got somebody that's still learning the ropes a little bit and you want to make sure that they double check that code to make sure that code that they're putting in for 4 bite wings or whatever is appropriate. You can make sure that the software doesn't do that so that you have this pause point. You have this human check-in, right? Because we realize that there's still a lot of human intervention involved in practicing dentistry. We're just trying to automate some of that for them. Does that help?
Right, right. To me, that's really important. As an ex-IT software kind of guy, using software for operations is so important, right? Forgetting about the clinical aspects and all the other patient care type things, just running your organization to actually have software that helps you do that is really important. So I'm glad you guys are doing that. And, I've seen that in some group and DSO software, but I'm glad we're starting to see it for the small practice, because even if you're small, your operations is important. So I like to segue a little bit into what's becoming a really popular topic, right, in dental IT, dental technology, and dental software. And it's as patients demand more, right, as consumers, right, there's a whole idea about how does software help improve patient experience, loyalty, and retention. And as you and I have talked, you kind of talked about, three different areas, right? How the software can be used in what might be something termed as patient acquisition, right, before they get to the office. Uh, Secondly, you had mentioned in a previous conversation how the patient experience within the office and clinic itself, and then kind of post visit, right? Can you talk a little bit about how Dentrix is using their software to help patient experience and retention in those three areas?
Sure. So yeah, we talked about that, that patient experience before and how it starts before they get to your office, when they're there, and after they leave. And it all has to do with those connected workflows and being able to have, again, a central record, right? A source of truth for every piece of data that you gather along the journey, and to be able to use that, right, as you go along to help you provide a better experience for the patient. And, as much as we love to talk about software, I know that the real patient experience that patients remember, they come from people. And I think that's the advantage that the solo practice has, is their people, and that any practice has. And what we're trying to do is, again, like you said, is level that playing field to allow the workflow and automation to happen. And so back to your question, you talked about, those three areas. Yeah, Dentrix has solutions to help with the patient acquisition, patient marketing, some of the things you need to do in order to attract and acquire a patient before they get to your practice. So that's the story that you tell, right, to a potential patient about who you are and what you do well. And we provide solutions. You might have heard of, Demand Force. We acquired them a little while ago. Lighthouse, Sesame Communications, some of these things that people have been using in the industry for a number of years. We use those to help communicate with patients and to help do practice marketing, to help your practice tell the right story. And more importantly, when patients do engage with you in that way, potential patients, you're gathering their information, you're gathering their preferences about where they were at, what caught their eye, and how they became your patient, right? And then when they're there, we move on to, online scheduling and being able to have them book online if they want to see you right away. And that transitions into the piece where patients come into your office. And we use our clinical and financial workflow pieces that we talked a little bit about before this, some core pieces of your practice management software, as well as your scheduling and front office stuff, to help you serve that patient the best while they're there, and to, again, gather their information. You're talking about eligibility insurance information, patient payment information, clinical background, medical alerts, all those things. And then you kind of transition that piece from that piece into after they leave, when you've performed your procedure, when you present it to them, if they've accepted your treatment, what kind of financial arrangements they prefer to have or to make. And after that, what kind of follow-up they prefer, how to keep them as a loyal customer. All these little pieces of information you gather along the way should help you with the next step for that patient, so that you kind of have this 360-degree view of who's your patient really, other than, what does their mouth look like and what kind of care does it need? Who is your patient, so that you can kind of provide that great creative boutique experience that solo practices are so good at.
It's interesting because as you talk about the patient experience from soup to nuts, right, in a practice, we talked about workflow, streamlining operations in the practice, but really what you're kind of talking about, there is a workflow in the patient experience, and all these little bits and pieces really help from beginning to end, from getting to the practice, from post visit. It is a workflow. So patient experience, really, in a way, isn't it?
It is. So a patient experience is your office in a very particular way, and it's not ever the same, right? We have things that we repeat often, but a patient experience is a very linear process. They're going to experience, your practice marketing pieces first, because they don't know who you are, before they get in there to see who you are and experience your practice from their other senses. And, it's going to be the same after they leave. So a patient starts thinking about you long before they make it to your office, and they don't stop thinking about you after they leave. They don't have to anyway. But you're right. It's a patient experience is a very physical and digital experience, and making sure that those two match is kind of what we want to use the software for.
When I work with practices, helping them get software, uh, obviously we see the software itself, we evaluate it, how it works. But what's as important to me for my clients is how it's implemented, how they're trained, how they're going to use the software efficiently. Can you talk a little bit about how Dentrix, when somebody gets your software, some of the things that you do from a people standpoint that you're kind of proud of, that you think really help a practice to use Dentrix as much as they can, to use 100% of Dentrix instead of just 30 or 40 or 50%?
Well, Dentrix is a pretty big product. It does a lot of things, right? And so we understand that Dentrix can be a little overwhelming, especially for new users. And we try to make it easy to do that. We have our mastery tracks programs, an essentials track that we have inside of that to help teach people the basics of what to do inside of Dentrix. But like you said, Mike, we're more interested really in helping people get better at their jobs and to be more profitable, not just to be able to push the buttons right? Here's the buttons that you push, and we want you to be proficient, and we have training to help you do that. But we also have training programs and people there, like our profitability coaching team, right? And our onboarding team, to really help you be able to, get all the data brought over from some other practice management software that you use to ensure that you have as much of your data as you possibly can get, your patient data, and also to help you train, not just, and again, I can hear the office manager in my mind saying, I don't need one more piece of software to train on. I already have way too many things to train on. And this is the value, I think, of cross training and prioritization of your training, right? You got to understand what's important to know. And it's important that, different people know how to do the same thing in case you have people that go, that turn over or that are gone on vacation or something. I get that, right? But again, we see as a software partner here that it's important to help people be better at their jobs, not just proficient at the software, so that for example, you don't just know how to push the buttons to pull a report in Dentrix, right? But you know the importance of that report and how that report is going to help you be a more profitable practice or to gain a new edge in the business that you're trying to run, that business of dentistry.
No, that's really important. I'm really glad we're spending a few minutes touching upon that. That's so important to practice, is to think about that whole people aspect, because at the end of the day, what I've learned over years, both in medicine and dentistry, of helping groups and practices get software, is that the partnership, right? The people partnership between the vendor and between the customer is so important. I'd like to kind of close a little bit, put on kind of your visionary cap in the industry. And I know obviously there's certain things going on in the weeds you can't talk about, right, at Shine and Dentrix. But can you talk a little bit about kind of over the next year or 2 years, where you see software going in general, how the advances in software that you see are really going to help a practice in the future?
Sure. Well, I don't claim to be a prophet for the industry or anything. I know that I'm not going to be, I haven't been in the business as long as these other guys, some of these other guys, and I look to my own industry points to see what's happening, right? But I can at least tell you, at least in our little neck of the woods over here, um, uh, task and how would I put that? Task and workflow automation is big, and it'll continue to be big. So pieces that we just don't know, we don't know now, right? Things that you do right now to diagnose, for example, having to, and we've heard about this before, right? Everybody talks about machine learning and AI and all these cool pieces of tech coming. They're coming, and they will integrate. And it'll be interesting to see how they integrate. So Dentrix and other practice management vendors, we would hope, Dentrix specifically, we're headed to some cool places, and you'll get to see that in the next year or two. But specifically, when we talk about where we're headed, I think machine learning has a big role to play in caries detection, for example. We're seeing a lot of vendors pop up talking about those kinds of things. I think extra clinical or outside of the practice, patient data is going to come into play. brushing patterns, sleeping patterns, breathing problems, right? Because you've already got some medical billing and sleep apnea stuff that some doctors do on the dental side. And these kinds of things will increasingly be important to the patient record. I think we see a big increase in the kinds of tech that we can use to track what a patient does outside of the practice and how that affects their oral health. And moving on into that, once we're into the practice, we're going to see, I think, an explosion of artificial learning and help when it comes to how to treat, look for, and detect caries. And I think that'll you'll see an even tighter integration between operational and clinical and financial workflows. You're going to start to see that tighten up a little bit so that we, where you have to kind of make those manual jumps right now from one system to the next, or from one kind of workflow to the next, those will start to go away. You'll start to see more streamlined process.
You know, I'm also really excited to kind of go full circle to the beginning of this conversation with your research. As we pointed out, Henry Schein and Dentrix have an awful lot of customers. So you have a tremendous research database. So when you talk about features and functionality that will come out in the future, there, like you said, there's things that we haven't even thought about, and those will be use cases that you'll learn about, right, from all your customers. So I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing what you find out with additional problems, additional use cases with your large database of customers, because at the end of the day, that will help drive innovative features, correct?
Absolutely. And, you know, whatever we think's coming down the pipe, it's always a little bit different. You just have to keep your eyes open and try and adjust to the future as it goes, right? And we think we have a good picture of what we want to do right now, but of course, that's always dependent on what happens to the industry, what our customers want, what becomes important. What's the new pillar of dentistry to support that with? Patient communications didn't used to be a huge pillar of practicing dentistry, and now it is, right? And we've moved into that digital realm. So who knows what that next one will be, but we're looking forward to try and support customers as we come out with these new features.
Well, thanks again for your time, Mike, and this has been a great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to kind of touching base with you once in a while as you innovate, as you develop more features and functionality, and keep taking Dentrix to the next step for practices. So again, thank you, and look forward to talking to you.
Use Mike. Thanks.